Boa tarde.
Hello, good afternoon to all of you who are here and the ones who are following us on YouTube. I'd like to welcome. I am Cristina Vicentin. I am coordinating this event, and Unifesp and USP are very pleased to host the launch in Portuguese of the practical guide how to regulate cannabis after the launch in Brasilia, which was a huge success. In this guide, we have elements for the debate in terms of regulating legal markets for the non-therapeutical use of cannabis based on a question, what can we learn from efforts of legalizing up to this date? The guide brings guidelines for the main practical challenges for a regulatory approach, which will be effective, but whose ethical and political horizon is to promote a world where the drug policy can bring about health, protect the vulnerable populations, and put safety in the first place. We are very pleased to welcome Stephen Rose, who produced the guide together with so many partners and having as the foundation the research and study on the experiences throughout the world, including consultancy to the Uruguayan government. And we also welcome our colleagues from JUSTA who worked very hard for the translation of this guide. And they're represented by Cristiano Maronna, who coordinated the Brazilian translation and who is the director of JUSTA. JUSTA is a research institution in advocacy that works in political economy of justice and works on policies that can reform the drug policy based on a paradigm other than that of war. And from that perspective, JUSTA published in 23, which was the launch, this very solid work, the drug law interpreting from the perspective of liberty. Legal guide based on scientific evidence that ensure health, human rights, and harm reduction. We are also happy to welcome Vladimir Saboy, the current president of the Cannabis Commission in Rio de Janeiro, and the president of the Commission of the Medicinal Cannabis of OAB, of the Brazilian Bar Association. We at USP and Unifesp understand it's necessary to codify the debate and build a drug policy in Brazil that's guided by human rights and can face the effect of the war on drugs, which is a war on the people who use drugs, especially the Black teenagers in our outskirts of the city that result in mass incarceration, genocide, and other violent answers from by the state. And the groups, there are various groups that are part of this USP Unifesp collaboration. So we have various groups, such as Group Corpus of the Public Health, and I welcome Yara, who is here, and the Laboratory of Psychoanalysis of the Institute of Psychology, and the Group for Reduction of for Harm Reduction at Unifesp in Santos, and they are coming on a bus from the city of Santos, and they will be here in some minutes. So Professor Luciana will greet you in the name of the research groups. And Professor Luciana Tony Vinicius de Sujus is the leader, the occupational therapist and vice leader of the use of medications and other drugs, and is researching on cannabis. So she was our liaison, and who will come to Sao Paulo, who will be in Sao Paulo very soon. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of Luciana Zafalon in the JUSTA group, Alice, who is taking photographs, Larissa in documentations. I would also like to thank the staff of the Institute for Advanced Studies and the Instituto Dialética for simultaneous translation. So we are organized as follows: Cristiano, Vladimir, and Professor Luciana will greet you. And Steve Rolls will have 40 minutes to present for his presentation. And if we have any time left, we will also have questions and answers, the Q&A session. And for our friends who are watching on YouTube, the questions can be sent to our email. I have and even though we were not able to answer everything today, we can answer later. So I would like to thank you all for the organization, and I will pass the floor to Cristiano Maronna for his opening word. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here at the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Sao Paulo for this event to launch the practical guide, How to Regulate Cannabis in Portuguese, which has been produced by the organization Transform, written by Steve Rolls, who's one of the authors of this guide, and has been translated into Portuguese by the JUSTA Platform, with targeting at boosting and qualifying the debate on regulating the marijuana in Brazil. I would like to thank Professor Cristina Vicentin, who enabled us to have this event here, and to thank all of the people involved in this, the organization of this event, the JUSTA staff. I would like to greet my friend from the Rio de Janeiro Brazilian Bar Association, Vladimir Saboia, and the Rio de Janeiro Bar Association is on the vanguard of the legal institutions in Brazil, and now is studying medicinal cannabis, and we have a committee to study it, and I have the privilege of working with Vladimir at this committee. And Professor Luciana is coming. Please sit down, come to the stage. And she is with Unifest and was also key to organize this event. And organizing this institution at USP, the main university in Brazil, is very meaningful. In Brasilia, we had an event for launching the guide last Tuesday. It is an initiative by Representative Congresswoman Samia Bonfim. We had a very powerful event which started at 10 o'clock and finished later than 7 o'clock in the evening. It's on YouTube and it can be watched. But I'm sure Steve will bring his experience once again of someone who, in the name of transform, has been establishing dialogue with countries who want to regulate the use of cannabis. So he participated in this debate in Uruguay, US, Canada, Luxembourg, Germany. And he is someone who brings to us the experience of discussing this theme in different situations. And when we decided to translate how to regulate cannabis into Portuguese, our goal was to try to face or to counter a situation in our country which is almost like banning the debate in our federal executive government. Minister Flávio Dino said various times that he's not going to legalize, decriminalize, and he doesn't consider that discussion the most important one for Brazil. And our Congress is not giving us signs that they want to discuss this topic. And we're talking about a guide whose goal is to deal with the non-therapeutic use, what we call the adult social use. Therapeutic use is a very important issue as well, but it's not the core theme, the core topic of the guide. And at our National Congress, there is some willingness to advance with this discussion, even though there is a huge resistance to the Bill of Law 399, it was passed by a commission and the lower house by one vote. The Bolsonaro, the so-called Bolsonarists, exchanged to members of that committee so that the ones in favor of the discussion would be replaced by some people who counter the idea. However, it was the committee approved the discussion of the bill of law. And the president of our lower house gave us some hints that this can advance in the second semester of this year. Anyway, we're talking about therapeutical use. Now, in terms of the adult social use of cannabis, we understand that translating into Portuguese this book, How to Regulate Cannabis, would be a way of qualifying the debate in Brazil. And last Tuesday, we had a wonderful, very solid debate with the presence of some members of the opposition in our lower house. The big discussion about this is, why did this plant, which was domesticated by human beings about 12,000 years ago and was banned 100 years ago, remains banned in all over the world, particularly in Brazil? Siddhartha Ribeiro, who is a professor, excuse me, a brilliant mind, by the way, a neuroscientist. He compares marijuana and a dog. What is a dog, he says? The dog is the result of a very rigorous genetic change that our ancestors thousands of years ago decided to domesticate a wolf, and based on the human needs, some various species of dogs or types of dogs were created. So there is a guide dog, the one that takes cognac to those who had no accident. So we have various types of breeds and types of dogs to meet human needs. And what is marijuana? It's the same thing, which doesn't bark, it doesn't have a tail, but it has been selected and designed by our ancestors to meet human needs, and it was banned about 100 years ago. Our friend Dennis Burgerman has a reference book on this topic called The End of the War, and he is writing another book called The Plant Who Knew Too Much, and will be launched next week. And the production of marijuana or cannabis is one of the largest, the biggest mistakes in civilization. The reasons who led to the prohibition of marijuana are false. They are counter scientific evidence. Of course, it's not innocuous. It's not to be used by everyone and anyone, but we as a society, we have experience in regulating risks. We deal with risks that come from the use of substances that are even more dangerous than cannabis, such as alcohol, that can kill people by ODs. And we deal with alcohol, and we have advertising, and we have some incentives, so to speak, for irresponsible use, like open bar kind of parties. So our current drug policy is very deleterious, and there we have research showing that our drug policy is stealing our future and reducing the life expectancy of many young people, incarcerating people, and feeding criminal gangs, and it does not hinder anyone from having access to the substance, even though they're banned, illegal. If you want to have access to it, you can do it easily, and that is terrible because a 5-year-old can buy cocaine, crack, and marijuana, and these are substances that should never be accessed by children and teenagers. So within this effort of building a just, effective, and human drug policy that can analyze the associated risks to the substances and promote legal frameworks for access with their own singularities, and thinking of damage, harm reduction, meaning there will be people using drugs, and these people must have access to these substances in a safe way is necessary. So the launch of this guide has the purpose of qualifying the debate to build a drug policy that is based on evidence. I am concluding by thanking the presence of Steve Rolls with us once again, and telling you that we will also work on the translation of another book on how to regulate psychedelic drugs, and 2 other books that transform producers with the goal of qualifying the debate on the use of illegal drugs. So thank you again, Professor Cristiano Vicentin, and to the Advanced Study Institute in Sao Paulo, Professor Luciana Turjus, Dr. Vladimir Saboya, and I greet all of you who are following us here in person or following us by YouTube, and pass the floor to Professor Cristina. Just to pass the floor to Vladimir Saboya, and thank you once again, and thank Luciana for coming here and welcoming all of you who came from Santos. Welcome. We want to follow up on the conversation with you later. Good afternoon to all of you. I have to greet my friends here on the panel. And first of all, I have to thank you for the opportunity of speaking here. Cristiano is in this commission that was created recently at the Bar Association. And when I heard about the translation of the guide, that had such an attraction to me that it was a brutal thing. I thought I need to have access to this manual and find and turn it into small leaflets. And so the Bar Association has more than 100 subsections in Sao Paulo. So when we created this commission in Rio, there was a big buzz at the subsections. So they demand some clarifications, and I'm very optimistic in terms of what is being done here, because I would like to have your authorization to replicate this manual in various places, because I'm at the very end, I'm dealing with lawyers, doctors, and I go to small towns, and there is a lot of prejudice against medicinal cannabis. So we are establishing partnerships with other committees to add something and think about not just medicinal cannabis. We need to break the prejudice with it, but we need to plan on a work group and go to the National Congress, and we have some articulations, some conversations to try to expedite this process. But I think our big challenge is to destroy this policy that has no meaning. It is absolutely biased, where rich white people have access, and there is no limit to those people. And if you go to a jail today, 80% of the people who are incarcerated, imprisoned because of the use of drugs are Black people. There is no sense in not having white people there. And why is it so difficult to go to the Maré favela, the shanty town? Because Rio de Janeiro works with the poor and the rich on the same plane. And if I go to a very rich area, Leblon, and if I smoke pot, I won't go to jail, and a Black person 100 meters from me will be imprisoned. We need to regulate this use in a very serious way, thinking about points of sale, children, teenagers who need to be educated. And we have to extinguish that kind of prohibition. I am very favorable to the social use of cannabis, and regulation should control it. Controlling is key. We need to have administrative police to have a quality control on that as well, because the quality is gets lost. So our challenge is huge. It's I've been working on this topic not too long ago, and I started by using medicinal cannabis, and I learned about the benefit of this plant. And this plant made me give up on various kinds of drugs and stimulant and sleeping drugs. So I'm completely engaged in this struggle. Yesterday, I went to the city of Curitiba to deal with that, because I think our role is really important, Maronna. Together with JUSTA, we need to get this seal by the Bar Association, and the opportunity our President Luciano Bandeira gave us, which is not an opportunity, it's just common sense. This won't be stopped. Again, this just needs to be regulated. We have to get Stephen's experience, and because we are in a continental-sized country, and we have all that is necessary to implement this on a large scale in sports, agriculture, etc. There are so many things that we need to delve deeper into it. So our regulation needs more visibility. And I told some people yesterday at a meeting, I want to give it national visibility. I want to make a lot of noise, and I want to create a big buzz on regulating cannabis. And whatever that is deals with medicinal cannabis will be on the social media to try to counter prejudice, which is very strong here in Brazil. However, we have good news. We have 6 committees created in the sectional and Rio at the Bar Association. And I am providing various groups with materials, and I hope we will have various commissions working on the same topic, because lawyers are very conservative, but when it comes to health and well-being, there is no conservative or barriers or liberal. You know, when they see that kind of medicine makes a huge difference to the treatment of a relative or a family member, they become sensitive to that. They are touched by that, and they give the first step. We had a Congress. It was a huge challenge. We had a 2-day Congress on Tuesday and on Monday and Tuesday, with the presence of a minister who had very robust decisions, who made a very, they gave us wonderful decisions. And for lawyers, this is really good, because we have a ceiling. The ceiling is on our favor. There is a discussion at the Supreme Court that they use as a bargain. They want to discuss, for instance, the other issues that are related to politics, and they try and use marijuana and cannabis to bargain with some discussions. However, the population, people, are seeking knowledge on this topic. We have a course being promoted on cannabis law, and it is really impressive how this spread throughout the country. We have people from the Amazon, by the state of Bahia, from small towns in Sao Paulo in the south. In other words, we have all that it takes to format this kind of, to give a framework to this regulation. And I believe we are almost like evangelization. I am going to Araruama yesterday, a city that is close to Rio, and to Macaé, 2 smaller cities than Rio, or small towns, who are calling people to go there and discuss medicinal cannabis. And in the past, some people were expelled from the Bar Association because they wanted to talk about marijuana. So we have congresses to break barriers. We had 1,200 people discussing medicinal cannabis. So I'm really looking forward to listen to Steve, and I thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here. I'm here in this very difficult task of controlling time because we really want to listen to Steve. So, Luciana, can you please not be short? I was late already when I came in, but I came really organized to use my time well. So thank you, Professor Cristina, for the opportunity. And thank you to the Institute of Advanced Studies. And we had in mind that this discussion is about the adult use, not medicinal use. And we are very surprised to be able to discuss that, because sometimes some people think talking about the social use is opposite to the medicinal use, and it's on the contrary. Those are two twin discussions. So I would like to greet Steve and welcome him and welcome all the people here representing this very colorful group, the group called the Diverso from the University of Sao Paulo in the city of Santos, who's been working in collective and empowering answers to drug-related problems. We are educating and training harm reduction professionals, and we are dealing with some people who are using drugs radically, and we've been learning about how to counter this process of marginalization that they are exposed to, and we are not in this group. So we're trying to broaden the debate inside the university and develop research on the use of cannabis for medical and well-being use, and recognize the potential for harm reduction in terms of other drug use, the use of other drugs. Right now, I am in my postdoctoral research comparing international experiences in the non-medical use of cannabis to provide the Brazilian discussion, policy discussion, with information. And I celebrate the launch of this material in Brazil, and it will be a tool to counter the barriers that kill selectively and incarcerate our young Black people, our poor people, children and women in very specific territories. I had the opportunity of reading the material before it was translated, and it is absolutely consistent and educational. And there are so many alternative regulations to the prohibition, and it sheds light to the topic that it's not about regulating or not, but how to do it based on scientific evidence to promote social justice, equity, and guarantee of human rights. And I'd like to highlight the analyses that were made under two dimensions: the equity, the restriction of access to the legal use to some small groups. And for instance, some Black people are Black because they are criminalized, but they don't benefit from the regulation. And also the corporate capture and the trend for new colonization explorations from north to south, especially in the north, from the North American industries to the South American ones. And in terms of atonement, I would like to highlight the expungement of criminal records. Most of the people we work with undergo this process of criminalization and incarceration, and they have very poor access to defense, and the urgent interruption of violent cycles that are perpetrated by police approaches to some racial groups. We need to be attentive to the new discussions such as Canada, such as the experiences in Canada and Uruguay. And some people find breaches in those regulation frameworks to criminalize some teenagers, especially in Canada, post-regulation, and the increase of incarceration of women in Uruguay that came after the regulation, and the reproduction of the violent age and racial violence. And we hope in Brazil we can contribute to this debate, especially based on the indigenous and Quilombo resistance, the Maroon resistance, and talk about sustainability and the human reconnection to nature and preserving the environment, and inspire movements that come from the south and go north. Thank you. Because I want to give Steve his 40 minutes, I will propose, I will suggest that we answer the YouTube questions later on by email. And we have it to finish at 3:30 sharp. So we will have a conversation later. Let us listen to Steve. We are really interested in listening to him. And after that, we can remain here in the room. Just remind you, he will speak English, and there you have a simultaneous translation equipment so that you can listen to the translation. And we will have a PowerPoint that he will use. Also, if you prefer to use your own cell phone, you can access our websites and listen to the translation if you want to. So when he starts speaking, please let us know, Georgie, if everything is okay or if we need to adjust anything.
I have a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to begin by saying a huge thank you to my partners at JUSTA, particularly Cristiano and Luciana, and the whole team at JUSTA for the work that they put into producing the translation and for organizing these events and for bringing me here. It's just a huge honor to be able to speak in Brasilia and now at this great university. And thank you to the Institute and Professor Cristiano and my fellow speakers. It's just amazing to be in Brazil. This is a great country and a huge country. I'm just going to go on to the first slide. And I've been working 10 years ago in Uruguay. I've been working a lot in Mexico on their cannabis reforms. Recently in Colombia, just last week, the final vote to amend their constitution to allow the legalization of cannabis just missed by 3 votes. But they will start again. But the reform movement is moving forward in South America and Latin America. And it's overdue for Brazil to be a part of that debate and a part of that change. So I'm just delighted to see that this debate is moving now. And if the work of my organization, Transform, can contribute to that process, that makes me very happy. And we are very pleased to see it. And I am part of a global network of organizations. Transform is based in the United Kingdom, but we have colleagues on every continent doing this work. And there is an organization called the International Drug Policy Consortium, IDPC, and they are a network of 180 organizations around the world on every continent. And we work together to push forward a progressive drug policy reform debate. And they have also produced some excellent literature on the principles to inform the cannabis reform debate. So please do check out the International Drug Policy Consortium and all my civil society colleagues around the world. Transform have been doing this work for 25 years, but we are one amongst many in a global network pushing for change. This is a global movement, and it's very welcome to have Brazil engaging more actively in it. Because as you can see on this map, reform of cannabis laws is happening all around the world. The countries in green have some form of medical cannabis. The countries in blue have non-medical or adult use recreational cannabis legalization. And this map I just got from Wikipedia, but it's already out of date. It's already out of date. Change is moving so fast now that there's several countries on here that are not even updated on the Wikipedia page yet. In Europe now, we have Germany and the Czech Republic and Luxembourg and Malta and the Netherlands and Switzerland. 6 countries are implementing some form of legalization and regulation of cannabis for non-medical adult use. In Thailand, in South Africa, in parts of Australia, there was a referendum in New Zealand that was just like the Columbia vote. The referendum in New Zealand just failed, but there is very active debates happening all over the world. And now 500 million people now live in countries with legal cannabis, that either actual or in being implemented. 500 million people. And in North America, it's almost the whole of North America now. You can walk from the Arctic Circle down the west coast of North America, almost all the way to the tropics in Mexico, without leaving a legal cannabis jurisdiction. You can walk halfway around the world in a legal cannabis jurisdiction. You'd need a very big joint to smoke for that walk, but you could do it if it was long enough. But my point is that there is a momentum. There is an accelerating process of change. It's like a domino effect. And it may feel like reform is happening slowly, but actually, if you think about it, 10 years ago, there was nowhere in the world had legal cannabis, nowhere. I mean, maybe the Netherlands, kind of half legal, but not really. And then Washington and Colorado in the US, and then Uruguay in 2013. And then now, on every continent, we have maybe 25 different jurisdictions with legal cannabis for adult use. And there is probably another 25 where the debate is really accelerating and active, and change will be coming in the next few years. So it's not just Germany and Luxembourg and those countries I mentioned in Europe. In Italy, there is a bill in Parliament. In Spain, there is a huge movement for change on cannabis. In Denmark, and around the world. So this is there is unstoppable momentum now. Can I have the next slide? There's unstoppable momentum. I mean, we already see reforms, even in Brazil with medical cannabis and industrial cannabis. And there is the Supreme Court, I believe, I'm trying to understand Brazilian law. It's quite confusing, and politics very confusing. But the Supreme Court may decriminalize personal possession of cannabis in the next few days or weeks. It may, hopefully very soon. So the door is opening for this discussion in Brazil as well. And we hope that this project that we have done together with JUSTA to bring this work from Transform and our colleagues around the world to Brazil in Portuguese can inform that debate. Next slide, thank you. So there are different dimensions to this discussion. There is industrial cannabis, the oil, the fabrics, the foods, the building materials. It's a fascinating plant for industrial uses. I'm not going to be talking about that. Medicinal cannabis, we've heard some of the amazing progress on medicinal cannabis in Brazil. It has huge potential for many different medical uses. I'm not really going to be talking about that either. And then there is recreational and adult use of cannabis. Cannabis is the most popular illegal drug in the world by far. It's not the most popular drug, that's alcohol and tobacco, but illegal drug is cannabis. And we need to have the discussion. It's not as easy as medical cannabis and industrial cannabis, which are less politically difficult, but we need to have the discussion. We need to have it because millions of people in Brazil and hundreds of millions of people across the world are using cannabis for non-medical reasons, and we cannot get rid of it. We cannot magic that away. We cannot wish it away. We've tried prohibition. We've tried the war on drugs. We've tried punishment. We've put millions of people in prison. Tens of millions of people have been criminalized. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We've tried it for nearly 100 years now. And you've heard from Cristiano and my other colleagues, this approach is a failed policy paradigm. Generations of failure. So we have to change. But the discussion, as both Cristiano and Luciana said, is not if we regulate the market, but how do we do it and how do we do it right? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that with reference to recreational adult use. And there are three questions, really. There's the practical questions. How do we regulate? What are the mechanics of the regulatory framework? There are the political questions. How do we achieve that change? And there is the legal questions. What is the domestic and international legal obstacles? So I'll come to those three in turn. Next slide, please. Firstly, on the practicalities of regulation. So this is really what the book is about. And apologies if I'm talking too fast. Oh, and I forgot to thank my translator. I don't know where you are, but you're amazing. So the book is about the practicalities of regulation, because regulating a risky product or risky behavior is one of the main things that governments do. It's one of the primary tasks that we elect our government to do. And if you think about it, almost everything around us is regulated. It's not just alcohol and tobacco and pharmaceuticals that are regulated. It's cars and the roads are regulated. Electronics, the plug system, the lighting, the foam in the chair to make it resistant to fire. Everything around us is regulated. The government is elected with that responsibility to keep us safe and to protect people from various risks. And for the most part, we are pretty good at it. There is a huge scholarship of regulatory theory and practice on how to regulate risky products and risky behaviors. And essentially, what this book did and the work that we've done on it was to draw on that regulatory theory and practice and apply that knowledge to cannabis, which for historical reasons has sat outside of the regulatory good practice. So all we're doing is using what we know about regulation and applying it to something that has not had it applied to before. So there's no mystery. There's no secret knowledge in the book. It's all quite obvious stuff. So we need to decide what we want our policy to do. What are our shared goals? And again, I think it's quite simple. We want to improve public health. We want to improve public security and reduce crime. We want to defend and promote human rights. We want to promote equality and an equitable society. We want to protect young people and vulnerable populations in particular. We want to have sustainable economic activity that protects the environment and protects international development and human rights also. And then what we do is we look at the regulatory tools that we have for each part of the regulatory, each part of the market, and we apply those tools following the evidence in ways that deliver on the goals that we all share. So this is just, really, it's just basic policy making. This is what policymakers and academics and regulators do every day. Next slide, please. And I'm just to say, I'm not going to go into the detail of the book. Please, it's available free online in Portuguese and Spanish and English and German and various other languages. Yes, there's an executive summary here in Portuguese, and there's a QR code on the back so you can access the full text in Portuguese. And there's a lot of detail in there, a lot of detail. It's 400 pages. It's a boring textbook. But we need a boring textbook for this because it's fundamentally, in many ways, a bureaucratic, technocratic challenge. Kind of going, yeah, legalize cannabis, that's quite exciting. But actually doing the work, designing a regulatory framework is quite boring. We have to think about tax, and we have to think about pricing and packaging and licensing and potency and age controls and marketing controls and advertising controls and all of these things that we do for everything else. We need to think about how are we going to do it properly for cannabis in the Brazilian context, given Brazilian behaviors and Brazilian markets and Brazilian politics and Brazilian culture. And I hope that the book, just to say, I hope that the book is not too prescriptive. We don't want to be colonial in coming and saying, you must do it this way. We're not doing that. We're sharing experiences from other fields, whether it's alcohol and tobacco and pharmaceutical regulation, and we're sharing experiences from other countries, Uruguay and Canada and some of the European countries and US states who have already legalized and regulated. Some of it's worked really well, some of it not so well. And we have to look at where mistakes are made also and evolve our thinking. And it won't be perfect either. If Brazil legalizes cannabis, they will make mistakes. They will get things wrong. Everywhere has made mistakes. But policy making is about evolution. It's about looking at the evidence, what's working, what's not working, and evolving our regulatory thinking based on the evidence. I'll come back to that. So this next slide is about the politics of change. And how do we achieve change? This is a graph of support for legalizing cannabis in the US. And you can see, like in 1999, so 23 years ago, support for legalizing cannabis was 16%, and opposition was 81%. But then around 2010, 2012, they crossed over, and support for legalization of cannabis became a majority position. And then now today, legalization support is 67%. It's even higher now. This is only 2019. It's nearly 70% now. So in 20 years, we've seen this complete turnaround in public opinion without either the Democrats or the Republican Party supporting this position. So this was led by civil society. It was led by people like us making the argument, criticizing the status quo, and promoting a vision. This was a civic movement in the US that has completely changed the political landscape. And even now, we have Republicans. So the conservatives are a majority in support of cannabis legalization as well. And this is really a really important point, that this is not about the left and right. This is an issue that affects all of us. And I think it's very important that there is a cross-party, non-partisan coalition of political forces who push forward on this. It's not, different political perspectives will have different priorities, but we can all agree that the current situation is failing, and we need to have the discussion about what will replace it. Can I have the next slide, thanks. And this is an international change also. I have a quote here from the United Nations Common Position on Drugs. And this is a document that was produced by all 31 of the UN agencies, including the World Health Organization, including the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, which is a historically prohibitionist organization, and including the UN Human Rights Organizations and UN Women and the UN Labour Organization, all of them, all 31, produce this document. And it calls on member states, all of the 190 or whatever it is, UN member states, it calls on them to, and I quote, promote alternatives to conviction and punishment in appropriate cases, including the decriminalization of drug possession for personal use. So in many ways, the Supreme Court decision that is happening now in Brazil is following guidance that is coming from the United Nations. And this is becoming a global change towards ending the criminalization of drug use. Now, legalization and regulation of markets is not a UN position yet. We still have the UN drug treaties. I will come back to them at the end if we have time. The UN is still essentially prohibitionist when it comes to legalization of cannabis, but that is changing. I go to the UN every year in Vienna in March for the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which is the big meeting of all the countries to discuss drug policy and global drug enforcement. And 10 years ago, there was silence on legalization, nothing, apart from from me and from my colleagues in civil society. But now you have the Netherlands and Canada and Uruguay and Germany and Malta and all these other reform countries are having big arguments in the plenary at the UN with China and Russia and Singapore and other countries, the prohibitionist countries. So there is a big debate happening in the UN right now, and we need Brazil to be part of that debate on the reform side, obviously. And just thinking about Singapore, I mean, Singapore are arguing at the UN, they have the death penalty for cannabis offences. In the last 3 months, 3 people have been executed by hanging for minor cannabis offences, executed still. So we are privileged to be here and be able to have this discussion openly. You could not have a meeting like this in Singapore. You would be shut down and arrested. Next slide, please. The nature of the change process is important. Different countries around the world have reformed in different ways. In Mexico and South Africa, they had constitutional courts have basically struck down the prohibition of cannabis. So there was activist-led strategic litigation that went all the way to the Supreme Courts and the Supreme Constitutional Court and struck down their cannabis laws, which is great. It's an option. I mean, and the decriminalization case in your Supreme Court is another example. The problem is that they struck down the prohibition, but there was nothing ready to replace it. So now they have had some years in a kind of legal limbo state, a kind of grey confusion about what is legal and what is not legal. So we have to think about that. You don't want to get rid of a law and have nothing ready to replace it. Something to think about. In other countries like Uruguay and Canada, the European reforms, Thailand and Colombia also, we've seen a legislatively led process. And I think there are big advantages to doing it that way. But again, it has to be done properly. You need to have an open debate with all of the key voices and all of the key stakeholders. So people who use cannabis, people who sell and produce cannabis, the police, the doctors, the medical professionals, the parents, the educators, the regulators, we all need to sit down and have that discussion and work through what does regulation mean here in Brazil? How do we achieve the goals that we all want to share? And then, of course, there is the activist-led change as well. In most of the US states, it was activist-led ballot initiatives. So it was civic activism and votes. They have a ballot system where you can change the law by votes in some, but not all, US states. And that can be good as well. But the problem with that is that the shape of the regulation will be determined by the activists and often by industry who may be funding the change. So there is a danger there of corporate capture, where industry fund the reforms, but the reforms take the shape that meets their interests. And I'll come to that next. In terms of this debate around who participates in the discussion, we need to acknowledge that there are different stakeholders, different interest groups, and they have different priorities. So the business people prioritize making money. The Treasury, your finance department, want tax revenue. The parent groups, they will want to protect children. The public health people want to protect public health. And sometimes these priorities are in tension with each other. If you think about tobacco policy, for example, the public health people want to put the price of tobacco up to prevent use. We know that as the price goes up, people smoke less cigarettes and you get better public health outcomes. But the police will say, if you put the tax up too high, you create incentives for smuggling, tax avoidance, or counterfeiting of illegal cigarettes. So there is a conflict there, and that there is no perfect answer. So all of these stakeholders, they need to be part of the discussion, but they also need to accept that not everybody gets everything that they want. There always has to be compromise with any policy making, but specifically with this, there will be some compromise. Some of the cannabis users will say, oh, I don't want, why are you taxing my cannabis? And some of the police will say, how do we enforce this? And the parents will say, what are you doing selling this? That you can't win everything. There will always be some tensions and there will always be some unhappiness. Compromise is essential. But there is a key balance, a key tension, which I think is very important, which is about the interests of profit making and commercialization versus the interests of public health and the wider public good. And we have to learn the lessons from alcohol and tobacco and the mistakes we have made historically with alcohol and tobacco, where profit making and commerce has been prioritized over public health. And alcohol and tobacco have been a public health disaster, a disaster. Now we are beginning to get to grips with tobacco regulation by banning smoking in public spaces and advertising of tobacco and other forms of controls and tax controls on tobacco. And we're seeing tobacco use is going down at the same time as other drug uses, illegal drug use is going up. So we can learn some of the lessons from mistakes, but also some of the successes with alcohol and tobacco regulation as well. But there is this fundamental tension of commerce versus and profit versus public health at the center of this. And we need to make sure that it is the public health people who are driving the policy change at this point, not the big commercial interests who want to make money selling cannabis. Okay, next slide. And I think this graph, we try to capture the essence of the argument. And this graph is in the executive summary, I think, and it's in the book, translated as well. Sorry, this is the English version. And essentially, this graph is explaining how we have on the y-axis social and health harms, and on the x-axis a spectrum of options from sort of the war on drugs in the middle to legal regulation. War on drugs on the left, legal regulation, strict regulation in the middle, and then commercial legalization over on the right. And you can see on both the right and the left, there is a problem with a lack of regulation, and social and health harms are increasing. And there's a lack of regulation when drugs are illegal, but there's also a lack of regulation when they are legal but within a free market. So there is a danger that we move from the unregulated criminal market We legalize, yay, that's great. But then we go too far the other way and we have an unregulated free market and the harms and start to rise again, as happened with alcohol and tobacco. Next slide. And there is this risk that Luciana mentioned, and there is a chapter in the book on this, of corporate capture. With alcohol and tobacco, you have 4 or 5 big companies that control 80 or 90% of the global market, not just the market in Brazil, the whole market around the world, by 4 or 5 multi-billion-dollar multinationals. And they have huge power to change, to corrupt politics, to shape policy in countries all over the world in their interests, not in our interests, in the interest of their profit. And we must be very careful to prevent this happening with cannabis, both domestically within Brazil and internationally. And we must ensure a diverse market of small and medium-sized businesses and avoid the danger of monopolies or oligopolies emerging with huge corporations who can corrupt the policymaking process in the interests of their profit rather than in the interests of public good. I think I'm going to sort of skip through this because we're running out of time, but there is an issue around the UN drug control treaties. It's something that we need to be thinking about. Brazil is a party has ratified these treaties, which basically say you may not have legal cannabis in a commercial sense. These treaties need to change. Just like our prohibition laws, they are out of date. They are from another era. They were being drafted in the 40s and 50s, so nearly 80 years ago. They're no longer fit for purpose and they need to change. Many countries are legalizing cannabis anyway. There are various discussions underway on how we can negotiate these treaties and reform the treaty system. It's a difficult and technical legal discussion, but again, the more countries that are part of that discussion, the easier it becomes. And the group of reform countries are working together now to have these discussions at the UN, and it would be hugely important if Brazil, a country so big and powerful and influential, can be part of that discussion also. So just my conclusions quickly. Cannabis regulation is coming. Cannabis will be legal in Brazil, whether it's next year, whether it's in 5 years, or whether it's in 10 years. It will happen. So you need to be having the discussion now on how to do it, how to get it right, and how to prioritize our goals of social equity, of sustainability, of human rights, of a diverse, equitable industry. And we need to all be involved. So we need to have particularly the impacted communities that who have been impacted historically need to be involved in helping shape the discussion on what regulation of cannabis will look like. Luciana mentioned that there is a chapter in the book on equity programs, and there is a chapter in the book on expungement. These are really important concepts that have emerged powerfully in the last 10 years, where you can design your market, you can design your regulatory infrastructure in ways that have a reparative element, so that the communities who have historically been most harmed by prohibition can share in the benefits. Because we don't want to legalize cannabis and simply replicate the iniquities of the war on drugs with a sort of a capitalist, highly commercialized market that excludes the people who were harmed by prohibition also, and the big corporations take over and the money flows to the global north. So we have an amazing opportunity to do this differently and to do it better. These equity programs that have been emerging in places like Massachusetts and New Jersey and New York and Illinois and California and Colorado and many of these states give preference with licensing to impacted communities, and they provide technical support and loans and capital to facilitate access to this market. And a percentage of the tax revenue, in New York it's 40%, in New Jersey it's 70% of the tax revenue from cannabis is directed back to impacted communities. 70% of the tax. That's pretty amazing. You know, given this is the US, the kind of home of free market capitalism, 70% of the tax from cannabis in New Jersey goes back to impacted communities, social programs. That's pretty amazing. And New York is 40%. But you know, it's still incredible. I thought 40% was amazing, and then New Jersey came along and like, we're going to do better. We're going to do 70%. It's incredible. So you can do these things differently. And of course, we need to expunge the criminal records. We need to make sure that the legacy, the toxic legacy of criminalization is addressed as well. It's a hugely important part of the reparative process. And obviously, you know, I've learned a lot about the racial dynamics in Brazil these last few days. Clearly, the Black community has been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and they need to be part of this conversation, and they need to be prioritized as we move forward with our reforms. I've only got a few minutes. I wanted to flag this idea of a transitional decriminalization model. If the courts, please, decriminalize cannabis today or tomorrow or next week or whenever it is, there is an option to decriminalize not just personal possession, but home growing. You can include personal possession, home growing of 5 plants or 6 plants or whatever it is, which will give people a form of legal access. It's kind of annoying to have to grow your own plants if you want to go to a store. But anyway, and in places like Spain, they have these, they're called not-for-profit membership-based associations, kind of cannabis clubs that operate on a non-commercial basis within a decriminalization framework. And this is something I was talking to some of the policymakers in Brasilia this week. You know, maybe if you have decriminalization, you could have these non-profit associations. You could join as a member and they grow and supply the membership only. It's not a retail model. You have to be a member of one of these clubs, and it operates on a non-commercial basis. So we keep the big corporations out. It's a localized, domestic, semi-formal supply chain. It's important that we look at that. So that, anyway, just finally to conclude, there's an amazing opportunity for Brazil here to show some leadership, to do something different, to address this historic failure with meaningful reforms, but to do things differently to how we've done before with alcohol and tobacco and other drugs. Let's do things differently, and let's do things better. And I hope that the book and the contributions from all my colleagues around the world that have gone into this book and our partners in Brazil, together we can have this debate and move this reform forward and finally legalize and regulate cannabis in Brazil. Thank you.
Temos 5 minutos. Bom, muito obrigada, Steve.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for this very provocative presentation, which calls upon us to move to promote this debate and for this conversation you had with research groups here and promoting these conversations. We are all summoned, I think, to keep on promoting this debate. We have 5 minutes. I think whether Cristiano, Luciana, or someone wants to share something, a question or a thought, I ask you to please come forward so that we can translate that for Steve and everybody can hear you. My name is Felipe Angeli, and because we have very little time, and I ask all of you, whoever wants to answer, based on your presentation, we have 2 big challenges here. I mean, we have thousands of challenges, but especially in Brazil, we have two challenges. One specific thing is the expectation that there is a regulation of the drug market, which is broader, whether this will have a positive impact on crime, to end crime. So Brazil is very important in the drug market as a supplier for Europe when we sell cocaine. And at first, this will never be reached by a regulation. It will come in a progressive way. And it's a difficult question, I know. But thinking about narrative to kind of shape our expectations. In Uruguay, for instance, not hindering the legal market. This is the first question. And the second one is the role of Brazil on this theme. It's the importance of this in Brazil. It's our own discussion, and Brazil has a mental challenge. We have a specific problem, and we know that, for instance, the national drug trafficking is the problem in the Amazon, and the environmental problems created by drugs. It's very serious, and how we can join the regulation in a perspective of defending the environment, etc. I know I'm being very confusing in the way I'm asking, but I hope you could get the question. I have a question for you on strategy. We know what happened recently in New York. Based on what we heard, there was a strategic decision, including by the Black movement, of postponing the regulation of the market so that it will happen in under more favorable conditions to deal with some issues that Steve brought about, the corporate culture and atonement. I would like to ask about Brazil. You have this context. For instance, we have a bill of law number 399 in our Congress, which legalizes some markets, specifically industrial and medicinal cannabis. There are some breaches for patient associations, but it does not deal with corporate capture and atonement, and it makes it even more serious. And I see among some people the idea that any advancement is good. But strategically, is it better for this bill of law number 399 not to be passed so that the regulation will happen in a more broadly and favorable scenario?
I'll leave the strategic question to my Brazilian colleagues. On the crime question, yes, legalizing cannabis is just one step. Obviously, there is more crime associated with cocaine and other drugs. We need to have that discussion as well. It's a point that I should have made, is that the cannabis discussion is one part of a bigger jigsaw. It would be good if we could legalize all drugs and regulate them all responsibly. And there's a good argument that actually the more dangerous drugs and more risky drugs should be regulated first. There's a good argument, but politically it's not possible. Politically, cannabis is always going to be first for obvious reasons. It's popular, it's less risky, it's culturally understood more. And it doesn't solve all the problems. Canada is 5 years in now. They have about 60% of the market is regulated, but 40% is still not regulated. Other places, California, it's not even that good. They're like 30% regulated for other reasons. But these are decisions we have to make. And we also need to be realistic that this will take time. The war on drugs has been with us for 50, 60 years. It will be a generational challenge to unpick it. One drug at a time, one country at a time, one law at a time. And the second part of your question was about the Amazon and the environment. Yes, I think this is a really important question. It's come up again multiple times this week. Clearly, the war on drugs and the way that it empowers organized crime groups is destabilizing entire regions. It's fueling not just deforestation to grow drugs, but the profits are being invested in illegal logging, illegal mining, illegal ranching, and corrupting institutions. And if you have weak governance and corruption, it's very difficult to do any kind of climate mitigation. If in many places in Colombia, for example, I don't know so much about Brazil, but I guess it's also true, the organized crime groups are almost the de facto government. They control the region. And when that happens, you're not going to get any environmental protection at all. So ending the war on drugs is an essential precursor to meaningful climate change. But that's not just cannabis. Cannabis is a small part of that. It's all drugs. And we need to have that discussion too. And we're working with JUSTA, and we're talking about maybe bringing some of that debate here also. Because that debate is beginning to happen. I've been working on Colombia on coca and cocaine reform. They're having a discussion in the Senate around cocaine regulation. Petro is part of that discussion. He had his name on the bill to legalize cocaine last year, and then he got made president, and now he...
Em complementação ao que disse o Steve, essa semana foi publicado o relatório mundial sobre drogas, né?
This year, the World Report on Drugs by the UN was published, and there's a chapter about the relationship between deforestation and environmental degradation and the activities of criminal organized crime, especially the ones that are dedicated to drugs. And I think you have a very current question, and JUSTA has a research project that is trying to identify the dynamics of the illegal market, especially in the Amazon. And I think we can help in this debate. And on Dennis's question, it's a key question, and I will pass the floor to Luciana. Last Tuesday, Joel Costa of the Institute of Defense of the Black People said, we Black people will not wait another 150 years for atonement and social justice. So I believe the New York example should inspire us. Not just any regulation interests us, but the one that contemplates historic atonement and social justice. And in my opinion, the key to solve all these interests that are being disputed is to ensure that any regulatory model that will contemplate for-profit organizations also contemplate self-cultivation cooperatives, and so that we will have historic atonement measures that can be achieved via taxation. We have the example of Evanstone in the US that does that, the example of New York, which allows for me to say that we don't want any regulations, but a regulation that contemplates our needs for historic atonement and social justice. I believe these questions are very important. I'll try to just complement on Cristiano's answer, because I think he touched the main points here. I believe our country is very difficult because of its dimension and the cultural differences, the differences in access to various things. And we will hardly come to a position that can prevent the stigmatization. So, for instance, the medical use is something that removed a little bit of the stigma, but Uruguay did both things together. So that could inspire us on how to advance. And I believe the medicinal discussion will take a long time, but there is a lot more interest on the part of the industry, and the industry is much stronger than we are. But in parallel, I think we could strategically advance in the discussion of the adult use so that we can come close to this discussion, which will happen right after the regulation of the medicinal use, because you do have a reduction in the stigma. Because when my colleague says, I wasn't for the decriminalization, but I used it for medical purposes, and this opens up your mind. So we need to accelerate the debate. When I choose to study the non-medical use, I seem like an alien in academia, but that's because we are behind so much, we're lagging so much behind.
O Brasil está criminalizando.
Uruguay did not criminalize the use in the 70s. The UN is saying we should decriminalize it. So we are really lagging behind. And the big contradiction in our Bill of Law is individual cultivation, because we have a research project at Unifesp, and we will have a Bill of Law for medical use and access via patient association, and maybe the industry, the pharmaceutical industry, which will surf that wave as well very easily. But we have a lot of people who have a permit for family cultivation. Will those people be outside the legislation, the framework? Can we at the university be of support to those people? And with indigenous partners in the city of Peruíbe, who are our partners in harm reduction, and they are undergoing a beautiful process, who exfoliated from the knowledge of the use of cannabis to the point that it is no longer part of their culture. We are recovering that appropriation, that culture. But we are also discussing medical use, but also discussing the regeneration of the soil, because mining has produced a great damage, and we can use hemp to heal the soil, and that can help. That can be of help. And people are responding very positively to that. And we can expedite this process if we have more space for debate. We have a problem with time. I would just like to mention something very quickly, which was discussed in Brasilia, which is family farming model, just like what happened in the wine production in Europe. I will do the following. Jorge, can you close the broadcasting? We will listen to Vladimir here, and we will be here for a few minutes. I'm really sorry, but this debate, we feel like having this discussion and having another one. So thank you to the people on YouTube. We will receive your questions via email. Thank you. I will say what I think in terms of laws and regulations. I think whatever comes will be welcome, because we will give a baby step. We will take a baby step. And I'm thinking about the two guides that you mentioned, Steve. I think we should diversify and just leave cannabis aside and start discussing other substances and increase the realm of regulation. People get a bit lost, but we have to grow. It is unavoidable. It will be regulated. We will go to the market and buy it, and the regulation must contemplate some type of incentive, because in our favelas, in the poor communities, they should have some kind of subsidy to be able to sell it, because they've been selling it for decades, and they are considered criminals. To supply this to the upper middle classes, and when the drugs are regulated, will they lose everything? No, this will create another huge crisis. So we have to think very in depth about that. But I'm in favor of favorable regulations. We will keep on fighting, struggling, and discussing, and arguing, and being trouble for everyone. And translator apologizes because this person is not speaking to the microphone, so we can't hear.
Just to say, I was wearing a suit and tie in Brasilia in the Senate, and Cristiano said, "You're coming to the university, you don't need to wear a suit."
Ele está dizendo que ele estava com terno e gravata em Brasília, né? E que hoje ele veio aqui na universidade e disse que ele não precisava usar.
And then he wears a suit and tie.
Não, eu uso porque eu sou advogado. Se eu não tiver de terno, as pessoas me reconhecem. Né? Uma vez eu cheguei no fórum com uma camisa social, uma calça social, sem gravata e sem terno. Aí eu cheguei no balcão de uma vara criminal e pedi para ver um processo em que o réu, inclusive, estava preso, era um caso de roubo. E aí a moça no cartório perguntou, mas o senhor é o réu? Eu falei, não, eu sou advogado. E aí nesse dia eu aprendi que o advogado, se ele não estiver fantasiado, ele não vai ser identificado. Né? Então eu detesto usar terno, mas eu sou obrigado por força da profissão que eu abracei. Bom, há mais alguma pergunta? Senão acho que a gente poderia encerrar, né? E mais uma vez agradecer a você, Cris, e a todos os